Welcome to Kiffin's Key, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project at the London Lyceum, which is dedicated to serious thinking for a serious church. I'm George Stefaniak, president of the London Lyceum, and I'm pumped to be talking with you guys today. Before I get into the topic and the subject below, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to it as well, hit that little notification bell, and drop a comment if you enjoyed the content, or if you disagreed and thought the content was terrible. Drop a comment too. I love talking with you guys, whether you agree or disagree. It's just fun. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the topic of deconstruction, exvangelicals, those sort of things. Not because that stuff is in the news anymore. It's not. That seems to be dead, gone, a little bit old, and not cool anymore to discuss. And yet, I still think it's an interesting test case, and also a testimony, for me anyway, to the riches of the intellectual tradition within the Christian tradition. I think there is just a ton of resources there, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just explain a little bit of why I'm still a Christian today, how the Lord and His providence has maintained my faith, as He does for countless others and through countless means. But for me, it relates significantly to the intellectual bulwark that is the church. So around 2 years ago, I started mulling a little bit the topic of deconstruction and the exvangelical stuff, just because it was everywhere. I felt like everywhere I looked, everywhere I turned, everybody's talking about this. It's right in the heat of Joshua Harris, apostatizing, and then you've got Abraham Piper just blowing up on his TikTok channel, and everybody's talking about it, everybody's thinking about it, and there's a lot of Christians who are fundamentally worried. And as I began to reflect on it, I reflected on my own life. So I reflected on how God has sustained me and why I might have been an exvangelical, but I wasn't and didn't become one thanks to God's providence. And I'm not trying to denigrate anybody in saying that. I'm just being honest. I think it's a bad thing to apostatize. It's a good thing to be kept in the faith. So to be clear, when I'm talking about these terms, they're not as popular as they once were. And when I use them, I'm not using them in the super technical Derrida sort of deconstruction stuff. So if you're a nerd, you know about that stuff. That's not what it's mean. I mean the colloquial sense of sort of examining your faith, examining your previously held beliefs, and ultimately rejecting them and building something new in place of it. And that is the same thing that goes for the exvangelical stuff, the cool little terminology for all the people who were evangelicals and then decided not to be and decided to be angry about it. I think that's probably the best way to put it. Sorry about that if that frustrates you, but I think that seems to be the real, I don't know, that's just what I see when I look at exvangelical. If I see exvangelical in someone's bio, I get the sense that they're angry and bitter. And maybe they are angry and bitter for good reasons. I don't want to discount that. But that does seem to be, by and large, what happens when you put that in your bio, is that you know you're not an evangelical anymore and you're really mad about it. And I want to say, if that's you, I want to be friends with you. Let's talk about it. And if you're worried about becoming this and not, you know what I mean. I'm trying to just say, look, everybody is worthy of love. Everybody is worthy of respect. And yet I still think apostasy is bad because, well, I think Scripture tells us that ultimately, you will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So I want to talk about myself, though. I don't want to talk about just the broader moment, all those sort of things. And I don't want to talk myself in a vain way. I just want to talk about it as a little bit of an encouragement, hopefully to you, if you've worried about these sort of things, you've questioned your own faith. And maybe this is, in a sense, can be just an encouragement to you to dig deeper into the Christian tradition to encourage you. So for me, as I thought about all that went on, as I've suggested, I realized, and reflecting in my own life, there was a period when I grew up. I guess I grew up in sort of the megachurch movement. You think of Andy Stanley's sort of North Point model. That's what I grew up in for the most part. Some more towards the end of Stephen Furtick sometimes, especially when I was in college and beyond, where it's just kind of like you got the lights and you got the fog and you got the decision music during the sermon. Whatever that comes to mind for it is probably what was happening, what I was experiencing, what I was part of. That was my church tradition. And there was, at some point, I grew up, I didn't really question my faith in any sense. That just wasn't something that really occurred to me. And there was some point and some moment in college when I began to really examine things. I realized I'm in a church that really doesn't seem to take Scripture seriously. I don't think that's true of everybody there. I don't want to say that. So just be clear, if you know me and you're a member at that church, I learned a lot from that church. I benefit from that church. I don't want to talk bad about it. But there was a sense in which there is just a flippancy with taking Scripture seriously and thinking theologically and thinking deeply about those sort of topics. It's more all about the mission, and the mission always ends up being like, what kind of cool music do I like? And I know it's deeper than that. I get it. But just for the sake of argument, that's how I'm feeling at the moment. And I'm examining evangelical culture as a whole, and it seems that everywhere I turn, this is what happens. I mean, there was a period of time where I was very much headlong into the cool, hip evangelical moments. I went to Stephen Furtick's one-day conference back as a sophomore in college. As a sophomore in college, this is $500 one-day conference, and that's all the money that I've got. And I go down this. I wake up at 1 a.m. I drive down for the day, and I probably feel like I need to convert 6 different times because of the way he's speaking on stage and all these things. So I am very immersed in this culture. I want to be a part of this culture. I'm going to all these church planting events. I am going to I'm at an evangelical college, university. They've got all the typical worship stuff with lights drawn down, and you sing songs that are repetitive for 10 hours on end until you have some sort of mystical experience, whatever. And I just begin to question all of this and think there's just not much depth here. There's not really anything going on. But in God's providence, he sent me a mentor who was a professor at the time of mine. And what ended up happening is it was a Greek professor, and we would spend 3 hours a week, one day a week at a bookstore off campus going through the Greek New Testament. It was Ephesians to start, and then I did other independent studies with him. And it was a life-changing experience because we didn't just talk about the New Testament. We talked about the implications and all that really went, anything and everything we talked about. And it was just serious, unfiltered, honest. And it was in depth saying, I don't know, and I want to figure out these things. And that really, it encouraged me, and it solidified my faith in a lot of ways that I think as I look back now, I wasn't thinking this then, but as I look back now, had I not had that strength there, the encouragement there through that mentor, I don't know where I would have be today. Because I look today and I think I am a more intellectually inclined sort of person. I just care about those sort of things. I think they're important, and I like to think about them. And given just even the amount of suffering that I've experienced and even just daily life, the drain of daily life, I think had I still been in those sort of church contexts, those evangelical contexts, I would have departed from the faith and left and said, there's really nothing here. Is this really all that there is to it? A fog machine, a pop song, and some cool videos on the screens? Is that really all there is to the Christian faith? So I feel like I was introduced to a whole new world, and I began to continue to be introduced to this new world, and it really rocked my world, and it solidified my faith. Being introduced to all these Christian intellectual giants, from Thomas to Augustine to Jonathan Edwards to Calvin, to all these different people who are thinking at the highest level, who are engaging the most difficult questions, who are thinking robustly and theologically about topics, all sorts of topics, and it's not looked down upon to do that. So often growing up for me, it was looked down upon to have any sort of intellectual curiosity or pursuit. Those were vain and unhelpful towards the mission. And yet here I found a place and a home in the Christian tradition. Anselm and these others who are just thinking incredible, complex ideas and thoughts about God and his world. And I realized there is so much life and vitality here. and it encouraged me. And I think it is one of God's main ways of keeping me in the faith. God uses all sorts of ordinary ways to keep us in the faith. When I was at university, I one of the cool things that it seems like everybody did, if it was, especially at the beginning of the school year, semester, or whatever, you gather with a group of new people, and the way they do icebreakers at evangelical schools is to tell your testimony. Everybody goes around, tells their testimony, and it seems like everybody takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I take 3 minutes because my testimony is utterly boring and ordinary to me, as I was thinking at the time. The Lord saved me at a young age, and He's maintained me since. And yet that is the reality for the vast majority of people, I think, is that they are saved in ordinary ways, and they are kept by ordinary means through the life of the local church, through the taking of the sacraments, and through the encouragement of the church itself. I think God keeps us there, and He uses saints of past, old, dead, long gone saints who still speak today and encourage us today. So for me, that's one of the reasons and one of the ways that God in His own providence has maintained my faith and encouraged it. It's through these Christian institutions, it's through these Christian individuals who decided to dedicate their lives and all of their resources and all of their mental powers to thinking deeply about God. Had I not found that, I really think that I wouldn't be a Christian today, and yet the Lord in His kindness used that. Now, I'm not saying all of that to discount Perseverance of the Saints or anything like that. I'm just saying this is one of those ordinary means that God used. And I want to say as an encouragement to you budding Christian intellectuals, or those who are potentially struggling in your faith because you don't find anything intellectually satisfying. Maybe you've encountered a significant intellectual problem of some sort, whether a problem of evil or whatever it may be for you. There is a great swath of Christian thinking on all of these topics, and it's ripe for the taking. So grab hold, engage, think, explore the depth and the riches of all that God has been doing throughout history in His church. What's funny about this is I wrote an essay, a short little essay, sort of recounting some of this, and in a more organized and orderly fashion than I've given you here in this episode. And it was, of course, picked up by, I guess, I don't know if they're evangelicals or not. I was tagged in a bajillion tweets and muted them all. But then I found out like 6 months later that some big online writer wrote an article about me. And it was funny. I want to read a couple of the things about it because I just think it tells you about the state of non-Christians who are seeking to destroy the church from without. So she, and remember, this was an article that I wrote as a personal testimony about God's sustaining grace for me. Intentionally so. I did not mean to universalize it in any sense, and I didn't universalize it in any sense. God uses all sorts of ordinary means to maintain the faith of all sorts of ordinary Christians. So I didn't want to say this is the only way. It's just intellectual robustness. That's the way to preserve your faith. No, absolutely not. God uses all sorts of things. For me, it was the intellectual stimulation that assists and aided my faith and kept it vibrant. Contrary to popular belief, intellectual work, high-level intellectual work, can actually aid, provide logs on the fire of the Christian faith and piety. Now, I didn't universalize it in any sense, and yet she was very clear, this author, that I was apparently universalizing my story, and she decided to weaponize that against me. And supposedly I was offering a cure for every single apostasy that had ever existed, which absolutely not I'm doing. In fact, they suggested that I was in a great moral panic over remaining in the faith. And apparently, for me, unless you think like me, you're a sad, strange little man. Cue the Buzz Lightyear and Woody little section.
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity. Farewell.
I was apparently an evangelical wannabe. Definitely don't want to be some influential evangelical, don't care. I was a panicking soul. Whatever you need to say to tell yourself to quiet your own conscience, I guess, is what you need to say, because I'm not panicking. I just was telling my own story about how God has used the intellectual tradition of the Christian faith to encourage me and to sustain my own faith in God and his church. I'm not worried for a second about anything. What else did she say? I'm vapid and contradicting Francis Chan, who I quite frankly don't know anything really about other than the random stuff that I see occasionally when he says crazy dumb things on the internet, and I don't really care to know. I supposedly, she said, can't help but tell readers how glad I am not to be like them, essentially. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I actually think this just speaks to your own insecurity that that's the case. I'm just a regular, everyday, normal person just like anybody else, and I'm just trying to live my life as fulfilling as possible, when I think that is through my own Christian faith in the God who I think created all the world and sustains us through his own nourishing in his word and his sacraments and his church, and through the intellectual tradition that sustained me. So that's all I was trying to say with this, is that I think that there is a great amount of intellectual resources that can encourage Christians. Oftentimes, for whatever reason, there do seem to be a lot of people who apostatize from the faith for intellectual reasons. And I think most of those intellectual reasons are not intellectual reasons, but sociological reasons or existential reasons, or just random, typical psychological desires. I want to do X, the Bible prohibits X, therefore I will come up with a solution to reject my faith, and I'm going to polish it as some sort of special intellectual thing. And I think that's dumb. There is great resources in the tradition. Most of the time when I talk to somebody who apostatized for some intellectual reason, they actually haven't engaged the relevant literature. They actually haven't engaged all that there is. They wanted to not believe, and so they didn't. Maybe they did read a good amount, but they didn't wrestle in good faith or honestly. Now, obviously, my theology is engaging some of that. I think, the Lord will persevere all of his saints. And yet, I still think it's true that those who apostatize don't take seriously the Christian intellectual tradition. I'm not saying that they're not intellectuals in their own right. I'm not saying that they don't read material. I'm not saying that they haven't engaged some of the relevant sources. I just think that they haven't engaged it, by and large, typically, ordinarily, in all its depth. And so what I would encourage you to do is, if you are on that fence, that you would engage the Christian tradition in its depth. And if you know somebody who is teetering or tottering or waffling in some sense, that you would encourage them to engage the tradition. Start with Augustine's Confessions. I can't think of anything better than that. Real, honest, and high-powered intellectual work right there. He's talking about normal everyday things, and Augustine's just awesome. I mean, you can't get better than him. So now I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I wanted to do a little bit of confessions of an almost exvangelical, I guess, or a would-be exvangelical. I don't know. If you have reasons that you think that you almost potentially would leave the faith, and what it is that the Lord has used to maintain your faith and encourage you, let me know about them in the comments below. Encourage me, encourage those others who are watching and listening, and would love to celebrate how God has used his people or his just general work to sustain you. If you have other ideas or thoughts about the episode in general, feel free to drop a comment below. This is a little bit abnormal sort of episode for me, just given that it's a little bit more personal, and I don't normally get this personal in these sort of things. It's not super personal. I mean, I'm just telling a little bit about my own history, but yet it is still a little abnormal. So tell me what you thought about it. Hopefully it was encouraging in some sense. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and paying attention and listening. Sometimes I don't know, is this worth it? Is this not worth it? Just being honest with you guys, and I hope it is. I hope it encourages you. It is fun for me. I'll be honest, but yeah. So that's that. And I just realized I forgot to turn on my lights. So hopefully, I'm the total nerd that puts on those, what are they, the ring light things. So I guess I failed in that in this episode, and hopefully, let's put it on. Oh, it's not even plugged in. So there, I can't even do it. So hopefully this was useful. I've said that 7 times. Enjoy it. Talk to you guys soon. Leave a comment. Thanks for tuning in to the only Analytic Baptist and Confessional YouTube channel on the planet. This is the London Lyceum, but it is a specific subdiscipline. It's Kiffin's Keep, hosted by me, Jordan Stefaniak. We'll talk to you guys soon. I'll talk to you guys soon.